The lawyer slid two things across the table to Nora, a manila envelope and a cold brass key. And across the room, Uncle Dale laughed so hard he had to set his coffee down, told the room they'd given the foster kid a rust bucket nobody could give away. Dale was wrong. He was wrong about a great many things that spring, but he was most wrong about the $10 tower, because the strip of ground it stood on would, before the leaves turned again, swallow every dollar he had already spent, and a few he had only borrowed. He just didn't know it yet. Neither did Nora. She closed her hand around the key. It was old, cut for a lock that maybe didn't exist anymore, and nobody in that room could have told her what it opened. Not Dale, not Brenda, not the lawyer counting his billable minutes. Nora didn't ask. 9 years in the county system had taught her that asking, out loud in front of people like this, only handed them another way to say no. So she put the key in her coat pocket and kept her face still. The lawyer's name was Renfro, and he read Walter Hale's last will the way a man reads a weather report he has read 100 times. The house on Depot Street, the 12 acres of bottomland behind it, the accounts at the Hadley Credit Union. All of it to Dale. Brenda sat beside her husband in a coat that still had the fold lines from the store, nodding at every line like she had written it herself. Then Renfro reached the last item on the page. To my granddaughter Nora Hale, he read, the water tower on the back parcel of the old feedlot and its contents. He paused. Appraised value, $10. Dale laughed before the man even finished the number. $10, he said, wiping at his eyes. And the appraiser rounded up to be nice. Honey, you can't sell that thing for scrap. County condemned it 3 winters back. Cost you more to haul it off than you'd ever get for the steel. Brenda smiled the careful smile of a woman practiced at being kind in public. Think of it as a keepsake, she said. Something to remember your grandpa by. The whole estate came to nearly $400,000. Dale and Brenda had carved it down to the studs in a single afternoon and handed the niece they had never once visited a tower the town used as a landmark. And nothing else. Dale called it fair. Everybody knows a Dale, and a Dale will always call the convenient thing fair. Outside in the gravel lot beyond the office window sat the rest of the picture. A new diesel truck, $40,000 of it, still wearing its paper tag in the back glass. Dale had bought it, the town would say later, against money that wasn't his yet, off a deal that wasn't done. He signed the will papers fast, the way a man signs when he has somewhere better to be. Nora signed where Renfro pointed. Her hand was steady. That surprised her a little. She was 18 years and 2 months old. She had aged out of foster care in March with a duffel bag, a diploma in a cardboard tube, and $217 she had saved bagging feed at the co-op out on Route 70. She rented a room by the week at the boarding house on Pearl Street. She had no people left who claimed her. And now, on a sheet of county paper, she had a tower. She could have left it at that. Most would have. The rust bucket, the laugh, the long bus ride into the rest of her life. But that evening, instead of going back to the room on Pearl, Nora walked the half-mile down Depot Street to look at the one thing in the whole world that was hers. The old Hale feedlot leaned into Depot the way it always had, shut since before Walter got sick. The big sliding doors were chained. The gravel had gone over to chickweed and Johnson grass that brushed wet against her jeans. And behind it, the tower stood the way it had stood her entire childhood, 100 and some feet of riveted steel, gone the deep orange of a penny, left out in the rain, the name Hale still ghosting across the belly of the tank, where the white paint had given up years ago. Past the tree line the Nolichucky ran brown and swollen and muttering, full of the week's rain, talking to itself the way that river did. A man came out onto the step of the hardware 2 doors down and watched her stand there. He didn't wave, he just looked at her the way the whole town would learn to look at her that spring, like she was a sad thing that had wandered back to a place that had no use for it. Nora let him look. She had been looked at by experts. A county notice was wired to the base of the tower. Condemned. Do not enter. The ink had run pale through 3 winters of weather. Up close, the steel breathed cold, colder than the evening around it, and the rivets wept long rust streaks down toward the footing, like the thing had been crying quietly for decades, and nobody bothered to notice. And down low near the concrete pad, Nora saw it. An access panel, about the size of a cabinet door, set into the curve of the base. Its bottom corner had sprung loose from the rivets, lifted maybe a finger's width off the dark inside. She crouched and put her hand flat against it. The metal gritted under her palm and gave, just slightly, with a sound like a long-held breath let part way out. She could have pried it then. She didn't. Condemned was condemned. A girl with $200 to her name didn't need a citation, or a fine, or worse, the rotten roof of a 100-year-old tank coming down on her head in the dark with nobody around to hear it. She took her hand back. She told herself she would come in daylight, when she could see what she was doing. She had no idea what waited on the other side of that panel. Neither did Dale. That, in the end, was the only fair thing about the whole arrangement. The light went out of the sky on her walk back, and the diner on the corner of Depot and Main came up warm and yellow against the blue. Nora had $11 left in her pocket, and one debt she meant to settle before she slept. 2 weeks back, her first day return to Hadley, she'd come up $1 short for a plate of eggs. The woman behind the counter, Faye, who had run the place since before Nora was born, had waved it off without a word. "Pay me when you can, hun." Nora had carried that dollar around in her head ever since like a stone in a shoe. She did not like owing people. Owing people was how they got to decide things about you. And people had decided enough things about Nora Hale to last her a lifetime. The bell over the door jingled. She crossed to the counter and laid a single dollar bill down flat and smoothed it twice with 2 fingers. "For the eggs," she said. 2 Tuesdays ago. Faye looked at the bill, then at the girl. Something moved in her face, slow. "You did not have to come do that tonight," she said. "Yeah," Nora said. "I did." Faye poured her a coffee and didn't ring it up. She leaned her forearms on the counter, the way a woman does when she has decided to say a thing. "You're Walter's girl," she said. Not a question. Janie's daughter. "You've got Janie's chin." She shook her head, slow and certain. "He talked about you, you know. Not to a lot of folks, but he did." Nora's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. For 9 years she had mailed that man a birthday card, every July from whatever house the county had her in that summer, in the most careful cursive she could make, on a stamp she sometimes picked over a candy bar at the checkout. "Happy birthday, Grandpa." From Nora, 9 cards, 9 Julys, 9 different return addresses, because the addresses kept changing on her whether she wanted them to or not. He never wrote back, not once. No card, no call. Not a single line in 9 years. And a child learns what silence means, or believes she does, and packs it away with the rest of what she's learned not to need. And here was Faye, drying a cup, saying the man had talked about her. Nora set the coffee down. "He never answered them," she said, before she could decide whether to. Faye didn't ask what she meant. She just held Nora's eyes a moment, and what was in her face was not pity, which was the only reason Nora didn't get up and leave. "Walter Hale," Faye said finally, was a man who said things in ways most people never thought to look for. She straightened up and went to wipe down the far end of the counter, and that was all she said, and somehow it was the kindest thing anybody had said to Nora in a long, long time. The room on Pearl Street was 10 feet by 10, a sink in the corner, and one window that looked at the brick wall of the building next door. Nora sat on the edge of the narrow bed, under the bare bulb, and opened the manila envelope for the first time. She had been carrying it folded against her ribs since the lawyer's office, the way you carry a thing you are not ready to find out about. Inside was one sheet of lined paper, folded in thirds. The creases were soft and pale, worn the way paper gets when it has been folded and unfolded a long while by somebody, long before it ever reached her hands. The handwriting ran big and slanted and pressed hard into the page. An old man's hand, a working man's hand. The letters dug in like he meant them to stay. "I didn't leave you the tower, girl. I left you the ground it stands on. Count the corners." That was the whole of it. No date, no signature. No word about the cards, or the silence, or any of it. Count the corners. Nora read it 3 times over. She looked at the brass key lying cold and dull on the bedspread, and then back at the 4 words that didn't mean anything she could reach. Outside her window, the Nolitchucky kept on in the dark, low and brown and patient. And across town, behind the chained doors of the old feedlot, the tower stood waiting. The way it had waited her whole life. The way it had been waiting, though she could not have known it yet, a good deal longer than that. The frost had not burned off the chickweed when Nora came back up Depot Street the next morning. She had slept maybe 2 hours on the narrow bed on Pearl Street, the note lying open on the blanket beside her the whole night. 4 words she could not put down. Count the corners. By first light she'd given up on sleeping, pulled on her boots and the old canvas coat of her grandfather's that still hung in the boarding house closet because nobody had ever thought to clear it out, and walked the half-mile down to the feedlot with the brass key closed in her fist and the manila envelope buttoned inside the coat, flat against her ribs. Hadley was not awake yet. The hardware was dark, the diner's windows still blue, and Route 70 out past the grain elevators carried one early truck north and then nothing. The Nolichucky had dropped a little overnight, but still ran the colour of strong tea down past the tree line, talking the same low talk it always talked. Nora let herself in through the gap, where the chain on the sliding doors had rusted soft enough to lift, and crossed the wet weeds to the base of the tower. And there in the grey light she crouched down where she had crouched the evening before. The access panel was held shut at the top by a hasp, and through the hasp hung a padlock. Brass once, now a swollen green knot of corrosion the size of a hen's egg. She had not seen it the night before in the dusk. She looked at it a long moment. Then she looked at the key in her hand, the cold, useless key the lawyer had slid across the table, the key Dale had laughed at, along with everything else. She fit it to the lock. It would not go at first. The works were packed with 30 years of grit and weather. She breathed on it, the way you do, foolish and hopeful, and worked the key in small and patient turns, back and forth, the way she had learned to do everything in her life, a little at a time and without expecting much. And then something deep in the lock gave with a gritty click she felt in her wrist more than heard, and the shackle sprang loose in her hand. Nora knelt there holding an open lock and did not move for a moment. Nobody in that lawyer's office could have told her what the key opened. Not Renfro, not Brenda with her store coat, not Dale, who had already spent the morning, 3 streets over, signing something he had no business signing yet. Feeling like a rich man, feeling the warm hood of a $40,000 truck under his hand. He did not feel the ground shift under him. He would, just not yet. She pried the panel back. The sprung corner came first, then the whole sheet of it groaned off the rivets and swung aside, and a breath of air came out of the dark inside that smelled of cold iron and river silt and old machine grease, the smell of a closed-up place that had been waiting a long time to be opened by the right person. Inside, set down into a bracket bolted to the curve of the base, stood a length of steel pipe about as long as her forearm, capped at both ends. A surveyor's tube. She knew it for what it was, the way you know a thing your blood knows, though she could not have said how. It was the kind of tube a man used to carry a rolled map out across a field of mud and keep it dry. There was a film of rust on the outside of it, but the caps were sound, screwed down tight and sealed at the seam with a ring of wax gone hard and brown. She lifted it out with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, the way a thing is heavier when it has something inside it that matters. Her cold fingers could not break the cap loose there, kneeling in the weeds with the river running, and the town starting to stir behind her, and she did not want to. Not there. Whatever was rolled inside that tube had been put there by her grandfather's own hands and sealed against the weather for years, and she was not going to spill it out into the chickweed and the frost like it was nothing. She wanted a flat, dry table and good light and a person who knew how to read what came out. She buttoned the tube inside her coat next to the envelope, against her heart on the other side, and she pressed the panel shut and she hooked the open lock back through the hasp so it would look from the road like nothing had been touched. Then she walked back into town to find the one man in Hadley who had walked these lines with Walter Hale. Everybody in Hadley knew Hollis Pruitt, and everybody trusted him, which in a town like Hadley is not the same thing, and is rarer than the first. He had been the county surveyor for going on 40 years, and for 30 of those, he had carried his chain and his transit out over every ridge and bottom and fence line within a day's walk of the Nolichucky. And a good many of those days he had spent walking beside Walter Hale, the two of them arguing in the friendly way old men argue about where a corner truly sat. His office was a narrow brick storefront off Main, with Pruitt Land Surveying painted on the glass in gold that had mostly flaked, and a drafting table by the window on pale and smooth as a creekstone. He was already in, coffee going, when the bell over his door rang, and a girl in a man's old coat came in, carrying a steel tube, like she was carrying a sleeping child. "Help you?" "Help, Hollis said, and then he looked at her face in the window light, really looked, and his own face changed. "Lord, you're Janie's girl." He set his cup down slow. You've got the Hale chin. Walter's chin. Before it was Janie's. Nora, she said. Nora Hale. I know whose you are, Hollis said, quiet. He came around the table. I heard they read the will Tuesday. I heard what they did. His jaw worked. I have known your Uncle Dale since he was a boy too lazy to close a gate, and I will not say more than that in front of a young lady. What have you got there? She laid the tube on the drafting table. I found it in the base of the tower, behind a locked panel. The key the lawyer gave me opened it. She paused. There's a note. From my grandpa, it says, I didn't leave you the tower. I left you the ground it stands on. Count the corners. Hollis went very still. When he spoke, his voice had gone careful, the way Faye's had gone careful at the diner counter. Say that last part again. Count the corners. He looked at the tube on his table for a long moment, and then he looked at Nora, and there was something coming up in his eyes that she did not have a name for yet, something between grief and a slow rising wonder. That old fox, he said softly. That sly old fox. He told me once, years back, said Hollis, I have done one smart thing in my life, and I will not live to see it pay off. And he would not say another word about it. Just grinned at me over the fence wire like a boy with a frog in his pocket. Hollis shook his head. Let's see what your grandfather left you, Nora Hale. He worked the cap with a pipe wrench wrapped in a rag so as not to mar it. Gentle, and the wax ring cracked away. And the cap turned. He tipped the tube and slid out a roll of paper wound in a sheet of yellow oilcloth, and tucked into the oilcloth a small brass key on a loop of string with a paper tag tied to it. The tag gone soft and brown, but the pencil on it still legible in that same dug-in hand. Spring House, it read. Valve. Hollis set the little key aside without much remark, though Nora saw his eyes catch on it, and he unrolled the document across his table and put a weight on each curling corner, 2 smooth brass cylinders, and his coffee cup, and the heel of his own hand, and he leaned over it, and for a while he did not say anything at all. It was a survey plat, hand-inked, the lines crisp, a compass rose in the corner, and a long column of bearings, and distances down the side in a draftsman's tidy print. But it was the notes in the margin that Hollis touched with one finger, the rough slanting pencil notes squeezed in alongside the clean ink, and his voice when it came was thick. That's his hand, he said. Walter's. I'd know it blind. He stood right where you're standing and watched me draw this. He tapped the date block. Recorded copy. See that stamp? Register of Deeds, Hadley County. This is not a sketch, girl. This was filed at the courthouse. It is on the books down there to this day, and it has been all this time, and not one soul went looking. Filed for what? Nora said. Her mouth had gone dry. What is it? Hollis straightened up. He looked at her across the old table, the way a man looks when he is about to hand somebody something heavy, and wants to be sure they have got their feet under them. It's a parcel, he said. A separate, titled, recorded parcel. Walter split it off the old feedlot ground and had me run the corners himself, and he deeded it out, by itself, away from everything else. The house, the bottomland, the rest of it, all that went one way, this little piece, went another. It never was part of the estate they carved up Tuesday, because legally it was never Walter's to leave by then. He'd already given it away. Hollis put his finger on the name block at the bottom of the plat, and turned the sheet a few degrees so the window light fell across it, and Nora leaned in and read, in clean recorded ink, her own name. Nora Hale. The room went quiet enough to hear the river 2 streets off. It's been yours, Hollis said gently, since you were a little girl. He gave you the ground a long time before any lawyer ever slid you a $10 tower. Nora did not say anything. She could not. She stood with both hands flat on the cool table and looked at her own name in a dead man's recorded ink, and felt the floor of 9 years tilt very slowly underneath her. Now, Hollis said, and there was iron coming into his voice now, the iron of a man who has decided to be on somebody's side. The note says, count the corners, and your grandfather did not waste words, in ink or out of it. So we're going to go count them. Get in the truck. They drove out depot in his old work truck, with the plat rolled careful on the bench between them, past the feedlot, past the tower standing rust orange against the morning, and Hollis pulled off onto the grass track that ran back toward the river, along the tree line. He cut the engine and took up a faded fiberglass rod with a flag on it from the bed, and he took a long steel probe and he walked Nora out into the wet grass, reading the bearings off the plat in a low, steady voice, like a man reading scripture. First corner, he said, and counted his paces from a leaning cedar Walter had noted in the margin, and stopped, and pushed the probe down into the sod, and it rang. Iron on iron. He knelt and dug back the grass with his fingers, and there it sat, the flat top of an iron pin sunk level with the ground, a surveyor's pin, capped and stamped, waiting in the dirt exactly where the old man had said it would be. Hollis pressed a flag into the ground beside it. The little orange flag stood up in the weeds and snapped once in the river wind. One, Nora said. They walked the line. Second corner, down toward the water, under a tangle of honeysuckle, the probe rang again. Third, back up along the old fence, where a strand of ancient bobwire had grown half into a hackberry trunk. The fourth took the longest, out near the lip of the bank where the nollichucky had eaten at the ground over the years, and Hollis frowned and paced it twice, and finally went down on his knees in the mud, and dug with both hands, and when the probe rang the fourth time, he let out a breath that fogged in the cold, and sat back on his heels. 4 corners, he said. 4 pins, just exactly like the man said. This whole piece from that cedar to this bank. He swept his muddy hand across the grass, and Nora turned and looked where he swept, and saw it for the first time as a shape, a real bounded piece of the earth with her name underneath it, the rusted tower standing square in the middle of it, like a chimney on a house that had burned away around it. 4 little orange flags stood up around it in the weeds, snapping in the wind off the water. Count the corners, Nora said, soft to nobody. He fenced it for you in iron, Hollis said, where no fool with a checkbook could pull the posts up. He got to his feet and wiped his hands down his pants, and there was a brightness in his old eyes. Come on back to the shop. I want another look at that plat, and I want to make some calls, and I want to find out exactly what your Uncle Dale has gone and promised these Calloway people. Because I have a feeling, Nora Hale, I have got a powerful feeling. Back at the narrow office, Hollis spread the plat again and went over it inch by inch with a glass, and Nora stood holding the steel tube in her hands, turning it, not for any reason, the way you hold a thing while your mind is somewhere else. And she felt down in the bottom of it something shift, a soft weight she had taken for the dark. She turned the tube up over the table. A bundle slid out and fanned across the plat. Envelopes, a small thick stack of them, bound once around with a rubber band, gone to powder, so it broke when it touched the table, and let them spread. Old envelopes, everyone a little different, everyone worn soft at the edges, and on the face of every single one, in careful schoolroom cursive that got a little surer year over year but never lost its careful slant, was the same address, written and rewritten by the same young hand. To Mr. Walter Hale, from different towns, from different counties, from a girl who kept getting moved and kept on writing anyway. Nora's own hand, Nora's own cards, everyone she had ever sent. 9 of them, 9 Julys, kept. She did not pick them up right away. She stood over them with her breath gone shallow, and Hollis went quiet beside her, and through the flaked gold letters on the window, the morning light came down across 9 birthday cards a man had carried out to a condemned tower and sealed in a steel tube against the weather and the years, right there alongside the deed, where he kept the only other thing in the world he meant for her to have. She turned over the topmost card with one finger. Inside, in pencil, under her own faded happy birthday grandpa from Nora, the old man had written a date, from, and Hollis, looking over her shoulder, made a low sound in his throat, because the date written in the card was the very same week stamped on the recorded deed, the week the ground had passed into her name, the 1st July she had ever mailed him a word, the same month the silence had started. He had never written her back. Not once in 9 years, but the week her first card reached him, while she was learning what she thought silence meant, Walter Hale had driven to the courthouse in Hadley and quietly put the one piece of ground Dale could never touch into the name of a little girl he was not allowed to answer. Hollis Pruitt let her have the cards. He did not say a word about them. He turned back to the plat and bent over it with his reading glass, and Nora stood with one of those 9 envelopes in her hand, and the radiator ticking up to heat, and the river running its low sound 2 streets over. And for a while, that was the whole of the world, a girl and a dead man's careful handwriting, and the smell of old ink coming up off the table. Then Hollis made a sound down in his chest, the kind a man makes when a thing he has been staring at quietly turns over and shows him its other face. "Nora," he said, "come look here. I want you to see what your grandfather did, because he did not do a small thing. And I have been 40 years at this, and I am only just now seeing the whole shape of it." She set the card down gentle on top of the others and came around the table. He laid the tip of his pencil against a thin line that ran clean across the parcel, a line ticked with little marks and noted in the old man's slanting hand. "You see that? That is an access easement. That is the legal right to drive across a piece of ground from the county road back to wherever you are going. And you see how it runs?" He traced it slow. "It comes in off Depot Street, and it crosses your parcel, and only your parcel, and there is no other way it can come. That whole tract behind you, the feedlot and the bottomland and every foot of it, there is exactly one place a truck can lawfully turn in, off a public road and get back to the river. And that one place runs straight across the dirt your tower is standing on." He moved the pencil to a little square inked near the bank, with a dotted line feathering off it. "And here, you see this? Spring," the note says. "Valve. Rights reserved. Your granddaddy held the water. The spring that feeds this whole bottom, the water any house out here would have to drink. He reserved the rights to it and tied them to this parcel, and he put your name under the both of them." He straightened up, and he took his glasses off, and his old eyes were bright and hard. "Your Uncle Dale has shook hands with Callaway Development, out of Knoxville, to sell that whole tract for them to stand up 40 houses and call it a subdivision. I have made my calls, and it is true, and they mean to close on it this week. And not one man of them knows that the road into it and the water under it already belong to you. They have bought themselves a house, and they do not hold the key to the front door. They cannot pour a footing. They cannot lay a water main. They cannot get one loaded cement truck off Depot Street and back to that bottom, without crossing your ground, without your name, without this." He set 2 fingers on the platter. "He did not leave you, scrap girl. He left you the one square in this whole county that all the rest of it cannot do without." Nora stood very still. Outside on Main a truck went by and somebody called to somebody, and the morning went on the way mornings do, ordinary, with the whole town not knowing a thing. "Then they can't build," she said slowly. "Without me, they can't. They cannot turn a shovel," Hollis said. He picked up the little brass key off the table, the one off the loop of string with the soft brown tag. "And I am not a man to take even Walter Hale's word against the ground itself. There is a thing here says Springhouse, and a thing here says Valve, and I want to put my own 2 eyes on it before I let either of us believe the whole of what I am telling you. Get your coat." The Springhouse was a squat thing of mortared riverstone, set back in the willows below the tower, half sunk into the bank, its door a slab of grey plank grown over so thick with trumpet vine that a person could walk past it a lifetime and take it for a heap of fallen rock. Hollis pulled the vine off it with his bare hands. The little brass key turned hard in a lock orange with rust and caught and gave, and the plank door dragged inward over a floor of packed clay, and the cold breathed up out of the dark and brought a sound up with it, low and steady and patient, the sound of moving water that had been running under that hill since before there was a Hadley above it to come and drink. Inside, on a stone shelf beaded with sweat, sat the valve, a heavy iron wheel valve, its body gone green with age, but the stem of it bright and bare where a careful hand had turned it and greased it season after season for who knew how long, and bolted to the stone above it was a small enamel plate, the kind a man has to order special and wait on, and stamped into it, Hale Spring, and under that smaller, a date and a string of numbers. Hollis leaned in close and read the numbers, and then he straightened up and took his hat off, which Nora had not once seen him do, and stood there bareheaded in the cold breath of the spring. "That is the recording number off your deed," he said quiet. He capped the town's water with his own 2 hands and stamped your deed number over the wheel, so that no man could ever stand up in a courtroom and swear he did not know whose it was. He shook his head slow. "Walter Hale. You sly, faithful old man. You thought of everything but telling her." The next morning Nora walked out Depot Street to sit by the tower, the way she had taken to doing, and there was a white crew cab pulled up on the grass with Callaway Development lettered on the door in green, and 3 men in orange vests out in the bottomland driving pink stakes into the ground in a long, careful line, one of them up on a tripod instrument, waving the others left and right, laying out where the streets would run and where the lots would sit, on ground that was to be sold come Friday. An older one with a clipboard and a foreman's belly came over when he caught her standing at the fence line. "Morning. Can't have you back in here, hun. This is all private, fixing to be a job site. You with somebody?" She said she was just looking. "Well, look from the road," he said. Not unkind, just a man with a schedule to keep." He nodded up at the tower. "That old thing's coming down anyhow. Monday, Tuesday, soon as the paper's signed Friday, we'll get a crew on it. Whole field will be houses by spring." He looked at the tower the way you look at a thing already gone. Bit of a shame. Landmark, I guess. But it don't hold water and it don't hold up, so. He shrugged and went back to his stakes. Nora looked past him at the line of pink ribbon fluttering across the bottom, and at her own 4 orange flags standing quiet in the weeds around the tower's feet. The flags his men had walked right past all morning, and never once thought to wonder about. She did not tell the foreman that every pink stake his crew had driven that day sat on ground that could not be built on, without the say of the 18-year-old girl he had just told to look from the road. She said, "Thank you." She walked back to the road, and she looked from the road the way he asked. She could afford to. She had the corners. Word gets around a town like Hadley faster than a body can walk across it. By that afternoon, somebody had told somebody who had told Dale that the Hale girl had been seen riding around in Hollis Pruitt's work truck, out at the feedlot, putting little flags in the weeds. And a thing like that does not sit easy on a man 3 days out from a closing he has already spent. So Nora was not altogether surprised, coming up depot the next morning, with her collar turned against the wind off the river, to hear a big new diesel come rattling up behind her and swing into the curb at her side. It was a 3/4 ton the colour of a ripe plum. Chrome throwing the sun, the cardboard dealer tag still taped in the back glass. The window slid down. Dale had his elbow out of it already, and a smile on him she had not gotten 1 inch of at the lawyer's office. Wide and warm and helpful as a preacher. "Nora, honey," he said. The very person. "You got a minute for your uncle?" Brenda leaned across from the passenger seat to get a look at her, still in the blue coat from the store with her name pinned to it, and gave Nora a little wave with her fingers, friendly as Sunday morning. "I've been thinking about you," Dale said. "Laying awake on it, tell you the truth. It didn't set right, the way all that come out at Renfro's. You a young girl, no daddy, no mama to speak of, handed that old rust pile of a tower." He shook his head like it grieved him personally. "That there's a liability, hun. You know what a liability is? Some kid climbs it and falls. That comes back on whoever's name is on it, comes back on you. I'd hate to see that land on you, just getting started in life." He let it sit a beat. "So Brenda and me talked it over, and we want to do right by you. We'll take it back off your hands, give you a little something for your trouble, get you on your feet. $500, cash money, you sign the 1 little paper, and you never have to think about that eyesore again." Nora stood on the sidewalk with the wind pulling at her coat, and she looked at her uncle's warm, helpful face, and she thought about a steel tube sealed with hard brown wax, and 4 little flags snapping in the weeds, and an iron wheel valve with her deed number stamped on the plate above it, and 9 birthday cards a dead man had carried out to that eyesore and kept like they were money in the bank, and she let not one single bit of it show. She had spent 9 years in other people's houses learning how to hold her face still over a thing that was breaking inside her. It was about the only inheritance the world had handed her before this week, and it served her now better than it ever had. "That's kind of you," she said. "Can I think on it?" Something moved behind Dale's eyes, quick, there and gone. A man who wanted this done and did not want to look like he wanted it. "Why, sure," he said. "Sure you can, hun. Only thing is, there's some folks interested in the whole of that ground, and they want their business closed up end of the week. Friday, over at Renfro's, 9 in the morning. And it'd just be cleaner, simpler for everybody, if that little tower parcel was, tidied up. Back in the family proper. Before then." He smiled again. "So don't think on it too long. I'll have Renfro draw the paper. You come on by Friday morning, get your 500, and we'll send you off with a clean slate." "Friday," Nora said. 9 o'clock. "All right, that's my girl." Dale rapped the door panel with his knuckles, pleased as a man could be, and the window slid up on Brenda's little finger wave, and the big plum truck pulled off up depot with its new tyres whining, carrying a man who believed all the way down into his boots that he had just snipped off the last loose thread in the smartest deal he would ever make in his life. He had no notion at all that he had just told the one person on this earth He ought to have feared exactly where to stand on Friday morning, and exactly what hour to be holding what she held. That same afternoon, Hollis carried her over to the courthouse, the old one on the square with the marble steps dished and worn in the middle from 100 years of feet, and he walked her past the long row of green deed books to the Register of Deeds counter and asked Della behind it, who he had known since she wore pigtails, to pull the plat and the deed by their numbers. Della laid the big book open on the slanted counter, and there it was, the same crisp lines, the same compass rows, recorded and stamped and dated, and beside it in the deed book, the conveyance written out in plain county language, Walter Hale to Nora Hale, the metes and bounds, the easement reserved, the water rights reserved, every word of it filed and sealed and paid for 9 years gone by. You want these certified? Della asked, and Hollis said yes, ma'am. 2 of each, and Della ran the copies and pressed her raised seal hard into the corner of every page, so the paper crimped up under it. That little blind bite that turns a photocopy into a thing a court is bound to look at. And she signed across each seal in blue ink. Nora paid for them out of the few folded bills in her coat, counting the dollars onto the cold marble one at a time, and she slid the certified copies into a brown county envelope and held it against her chest walking out, the very same way she had held the manila one walking up the gravel to the tower, like it was the only warm thing in a cold place. She stopped in at the diner on the way back, because the wind had got down into her bones and she wanted something hot, and Faye took one look at her coming through the door, and one look at the brown envelope held tight against her, and set a cup down in front of her without being asked. Faye wiped a stretch of counter that was already clean. Then she said it low, so it stayed at that end of the counter. Honey. Is that what I think it might be? Nora wrapped both hands around the warm cup. I can't rightly say yet, Miss Faye. No, Faye said. No, I don't expect you can. And she looked at the girl a moment longer, and something crossed her face that was halfway to a smile, and halfway to wanting to cry, and she went and cut a thick slab of buttermilk pie that nobody had ordered and set it down. On the house, and don't you argue with me. She leaned in over the counter. Your granddaddy used to sit right there, that very stool you're on, cup of coffee and a slice of this same pie. Every Saturday morning the Lord sent, he'd be glad it was you sitting in it. That's the only thing I'm going to say about any of it. Nora ate the pie. Out the window Depot Street went on about its evening, the light going long and gold down the old brick fronts, and the rusted tower stood up over the rooftops at the foot of the street, with the last of the sun caught red on its tank, and somewhere under it, the spring ran on in the dark the way it always had. Patient. Waiting. Hers. 3 days. Friday morning, 9 o'clock in Renfrow's office. A room full of men in good suits was going to sit down around a polished table with pens in their hands to sell a piece of ground, and there would not be a soul in that room but her who knew that the ground could not be sold. She finished the last of it. She paid for her coffee, and she left a little extra under the saucer for Faye, because a person pays what they owe, every time, no matter how small, and she had a long memory for both directions of it. Then she walked back out into the gold light and down toward the tower, to sit a while in the cold weeds beside the 4 orange flags, and turn over in her mind what a girl says, and what a girl lays down on a table, when the whole town that forgot she existed is finally, at long last, sitting in the one room with her. Friday came up clear and cold, frost laid silver along the grass on Depot Street, and at 5 minutes to 9 Nora Hale climbed the steps to the glass door, lettered Renfrow, Attorney at Law, in flaking gold, the brown county envelope held flat to her chest under her coat. The conference room was the finest she had ever set foot in. A long table waxed until it gave the ceiling lights back at you. Deep leather chairs, a silver pot of coffee on a tray nobody had poured from. More good suits sat around it than Hadley turned out in a year. 2 men down from Callaway Development in Knoxville, in soft grey suits, a leather folder open before each of them. A title clerk with a laptop. Renfrow at the head of it with his glasses pushed down his nose, and the signing papers squared under his palm. And along the near side, in a sport coat with the store creases still folded into it, Dale and Brenda beside him in her Sunday earrings. The pair of them swung toward the door, like they were receiving company. Dale's whole face came open when he saw her. There she is. Come in, honey, you're right on the dot. He drew out the chair next to his, the one set back a half a foot from the rest, and patted the seat of it. We're just fixing to start. You recall what we said? One little autograph and you're shut of it. And yonder's your $500 waiting on you. A white envelope sat at her place, fat with folded bills, and beside it a single page, "Quit claim" printed bold across the head of it, a yellow sticker arrow pointing where the name went. Nora sat. She laid her county envelope on the wood in front of her, squared it to the table edge with 2 fingers, and folded her hands on top of it, and she did not reach for the pen Renfro had set rolling toward her. "Before I put my name to anything," she said, and her voice came out low, but it went the whole length of that shining table and stopped every small sound in the room. "I'd like the men from Knoxville to see the rest of what they're buying." Behind her the door opened, and Hollis Pruitt came in with his hat already in his hand and a roll of paper under his arm, and he nodded to Renfro, who he had practiced across a counter from for 30 years, and said his name by way of good morning, and took up a place against a wall like a man who had come to see a thing done right. Nora opened the brown envelope. She drew out the certified plat first, the raised seal pressed hard into the corner, and turned it to face the Calloway men and slid it up the table. So, then the deed behind it. Della's blue ink crossing the seal. "The ground the tower stands on is its own parcel," she said, "recorded separate, before any one of you is thinking about Hadley. It holds the only road wide enough to bring a loaded truck into that bottom, and it holds the water rights to the spring under the whole tract. My grandfather put it in my name when I was 9 years old. It has been mine the entire time you were spending it." The older of the 2 Calloway men pulled the plat to him and put on his own glasses and looked at it a long while, and his face did a slow thing, the easy pleasure of a closing day going out of it by degrees. He handed it to the title clerk without a word. Her fingers went over the keys and they all sat in it, that waxed and waiting room, while a girl in a second-hand coat looked down at her folded hands. "It's recorded," the clerk said at last, quiet to the older man. "Separate book, separate parcel. Conveyance filed 9 years back. Access easement and water rights reserved to whoever holds the parcel." She looked up. "It's clean and it's hers. We can't write title across this tract without her name on the conveyance. The road, the water, all of it crosses her." Dale had been going from face to face, with a grin he was holding up with both hands. "Now hold on. That's a piece of scrap. That tower's condemned. It's on the county's own list. I've got the paper at the house. Nobody at this table is buying the tower, Dale." Hollis pushed off the wall and unrolled his own field copy onto the bright wood, the 4 corners marked in his hand. "They're buying the ground, 40 house lots, and every one of them sits behind a gate that opens on her parcel and drinks from a spring that's titled to her. I walked these lines with Walter Hale myself. I set these pins. There's 4 of them standing in the weeds out there this morning, 9 years in the dirt. And they say the same thing this deed says." He laid a blunt finger on the recording stamp at the foot of the page and bent to read the date under his glasses, and for a second something moved across his weathered face. "Filed the 9th of July, he said, softer now." Walter walked into Della's office and put this on record. The same week of the same month this child mailed him her first letter out of the home. He never once wrote her back because he was down at that courthouse, answering her where it would hold. The older Calloway man took his glasses off and pressed the bridge of his nose. And when he spoke to Nora, and to nobody else, the way men like him speak when they find the one person in a room who matters. "Miss Hale, it appears we've spent the week talking to the wrong party." He let that fall on Dale without a glance at him. "So let me talk to the right one. We can amend the closing. Convey your parcel into the deal at fair value, generous value, given the position you're sitting in. You'd leave here today a great deal better off than that envelope. Put a number on it." And there it was, the thing the whole room had quietly arranged itself around all week without ever once saying the word. The number. They had been certain she was a loose thread to snip. And now in their good chairs, they were just as certain she was a price to settle. Dale leaned in towards her, the warmth flooding back into him, nodding her toward the yes. "That's real money, honey. You take that." Nora unfolded her hands. She reached out and picked up the white envelope with the $500 in it, and for one breath, Dale's face was pure relief. Then she set it down in front of him, squared to the edge the way she'd squared her own, and slid it back across the wood until it touched his folded hands. "I'm not selling the spring," she said. The quiet that came down then was a different kind, and the older man waited inside it, sure it was the opening of a haggle. "Hadley drinks out of that hill." "It always has," Nora said. My grandfather capped it so a man would have to come through me to shut it off. A man has, and the answer is no. There won't be 40 houses in that bottom. There won't be a gate across that road. The water isn't for sale, and the ground that carries it isn't either. She gathered her certified copies back into the brown envelope, unhurried, and smoothed the crimped corner flat with her thumb. You keep the 500, Uncle Dale. I expect you're going to need it. That was the part he had not once thought through, going grey now under his Friday tan. The plum truck at the curb was borrowed against this morning. The note he had put down on Walter's house was borrowed against this morning. He had spent a sale that could not happen, and the men who had lent against it were sitting across the table, watching it not happen, drawing their leather folders shut, snapping the clasps, getting to their feet. The older Calloway man buttoned his coat. We'll see ourselves out. Mr. Hale, you and your bank have got some talking to do. Brenda had gone very still, her earrings catching the light, looking at her husband like she was seeing the true size of a thing for the first time. That spring, the field at the foot of Depot Street did not fill with houses. The pink ribbon came down out of the bottom, and Hollis's 4 orange flags stayed where they stood. The Hadley Water Board met in the back room of the firehouse and voted as 7 hands up to take the spring's flow under a recorded county easement with Nora Hale's name signed across the foot of it, drawn so the water could be used by the town and never again be bought out from under the people who drank it. Down at the tower, a man went up in a bucket lift and backed the screws out of the orange placard that had hung off its leg longer than the children of Hadley had been alive, and pried it loose and bolted up in its place a small white enamel plate Della had sent off for weeks before, and a painting crew started running fresh white up the old rusted tank. By summer, the tower stood white over Depot Street, Hale Spring lettered clean across the tank. At dusk, the floodlights came up along its legs, and the spring ran down into Hadley in the dark.